This is not just a marriage story. It's a storm, a silence, and a surrender. The story begins with the sound of boots on a wooden floor, steady but heavy, each step echoing with weight. Elias had never been a man who bent easily. Pride had been carved into him early, as sharp as the ridgelines of the land he worked. His family's name meant something, and he carried it like an iron yoke. To protect that name, to keep scandal from cutting through their lives, he had agreed to this marriage, a marriage in name only. There had been no tender vows, no whispers of devotion, no gentle clasping of hands to promise forever. Instead, there had been silence, and behind that silence, a quiet agreement. This was duty, nothing more. He would give her his name, but not his heart. She would stand beside him, but not too close. Clara, his wife, had stood at that altar with eyes that neither pleaded nor accused. She had not fought against her fate, nor had she reached for it with eagerness. She accepted it as one accepts a long winter, enduring, knowing it would bite, but too proud to shiver. Her quiet dignity unsettled him more than protest would have. The small town whispered, as small towns always do. Some said she had married up. Others said he had been forced down. There were rumors, guesses, little fires of gossip fanned by the bored and curious. But inside their home, the air was still, almost cold. The walls carried no laughter. At night, the fire on the hearth burned low. And in the silence, the distance between them seemed wider than the open plains outside. He had built his life on order, on schedules, on work, on silence that did not ask questions. But now there was another presence in that silence. Clara moved quietly, almost like a shadow, but not weak. Her hands tended the house with precise care, almost stubborn in its steadiness. She did not complain. She did not demand it, and somehow that only made the barrier between them harder. There were no sharp words between them yet. No storms, not in those early days. Only the cold agreement that their lives were tied, but their hearts would remain untouched. Elias told himself that was enough. That was safer. He did not owe her anything beyond his name, and yet when his eyes caught hers in passing, there was something there he could not pin down. Not warmth, not longing, but a stillness that unsettled him, as if she carried a strength he did not fully understand. The land outside was rough, the kind that tested a person. Dust clung to boots, storms swept through without warning, and winters made bones ache. A marriage like theirs fit that land well, hard, silent, unyielding. But even the hardest ground sometimes gave way to unexpected roots, and even the coldest sky broke open to let light through. For now, though, Elias stood like stone. He told himself his duty was done. He had given his family what they required. Clara would play her part, and he would play his. They would walk together side by side, without ever stepping closer. Yet in the quiet corners of the house, where shadows stretched long in the lamplight, there were moments when the silence pressed on him more than he liked to admit, and in those moments he would hear the soft sound of her moving through the rooms, steady, dignified, unyielding. He did not know it yet, but the stillness he feared would one day break his pride more than any storm could. This was the beginning. Not of love, not yet, but of the long road that would lead him to the day his heart would finally kneel. The storms between them did not come all at once. They arrived in small gusts. Sharp words dropped without thought. Silences that grew heavier than the walls around them. Looks that slid away instead of meeting. Elias was a man who built fences as high as pride could reach. He spoke when work required it, but when it came to matters of the heart, his words turned hard, clipped, and cold. Clara met that coldness with composure. She never raised her voice, never begged for gentleness, never argued to win. Yet her silence had weight. Sometimes it felt like she was not bending to his will, but simply waiting for him to see himself clearly. That unsettled him more than any argument would. At the dinner table, they shared bread and stew, but not conversation. Elias's eyes stayed fixed on his plate or the wood grain of the table. Clara ate quietly, never spilling her thoughts, but her stillness was not emptiness. It carried strength, the kind that did not need to shout. When her gaze did lift to meet his, it was not defiant, but neither was it meek. It was steady like the horizon line, always there, always unyielding. Outside, the world did not make its silence easier. Family and neighbors intruded with questions and gossip. His mother watched Clara with the sharpness of someone who feared weakness in a daughter-in-law. Friends made passing remarks about how strange it was to see Elias, a man of strong will tied to a woman so reserved. Some whispered that she was too proud, others that she was too cold. Every word planted seeds of tension in the soil of their marriage. Elias tried to brush it off. But deep inside, each careless comment sharpened the distance he kept from her. If he drew closer, would people call him weak? If he admitted to admiring her quiet strength, would that mean he had lost? Pride stiffened his back, and pride kept his words sharp. Clara bore the weight of that pride without breaking. When he snapped at her, she did not return fire. When he fell into silence, she matched it with her own, but not in surrender. She moved about her tasks with dignity, and sometimes her quiet presence stung him more than rebuke would. It was as if her composure reflected his harshness to him, and he did not like what he saw. Yet storms have a way of testing the strength of walls. And their home, though built of stone and wood, was also built of unspoken truths. When the winds of pride and silence pushed against those walls, cracks appeared. Moments when he almost said something different. Moments when her eyes almost softened. Moments that might have shifted everything. But those moments passed, swallowed by stubbornness. There were evenings when the distance between them felt like a battlefield. The house was quiet, the fire low, the night outside pressing against the windows. He would sit with a book he did not read, and she would sew in silence. The only sound was the steady rhythm of her needle, like a heartbeat against the silence. He felt it, though he would not admit it, that her presence, even unspoken, reached him. But pride is a hard stone to break, and he kept his walls high. Still, storms do not pass without leaving marks. Sharp words linger in the air. Silence leaves its chill, and pride hardens what it should soften. Elias told himself this was the life he had chosen, that duty was enough. But in truth, each storm was shaping something inside him, something he could not yet name. And Clara, though outwardly untouched, carried the quiet ache of living with a man who would not let himself be moved. This was the storm season of their marriage. And though neither of them knew it yet, storms are not only for breaking, they are for clearing the sky, making way for stillness that can change everything. After storms, there often comes a hush. Not peace, not yet, but a stillness that lingers like the quiet after thunder. That was how their days began to feel. The sharp edges between Elias and Clara did not vanish, but they dulled into silence. The house, once filled with the bite of pride and distance, now carried a strange calm. He worked long hours on the land, returning with dust on his boots and weariness in his bones. She kept the home steady, the fire always tended, meals set with careful hands. They did not speak much, but in the spaces where silence had once cut like a blade, it now rested like a blanket, heavy, but not unbearable. Elias began to notice things he had ignored before. The way Clara rose before dawn, her steps soft, her movements unhurried but purposeful. The way she paused at the window, looking out at the horizon as if she could draw strength from the line where sky met land. He noticed how her hands, though small, carried strength in them. Hands that did not tremble when she lifted buckets of water. Hands that stitched torn cloth with neat, firm strokes. She never sought his praise, never demanded thanks. But one evening when he came in to find his work shirt mended and folded on the table, something in his chest shifted. He did not speak it aloud, but he felt it. A quiet act of care, done without show, without asking for notice. Sometimes their paths crossed in small, wordless ways. Once a storm rattled the windows, rain pounding against the roof. The wind howled, and Elias stepped into the room where Clara sat, her sewing set aside. She did not look at him, but her stillness calmed something restless in him. He sat nearby, silent, and for the first time the quiet did not feel like a wall. It felt like shelter. Another time he found her in the garden, bent over the soil. The late sun caught her face, painting it with light. She looked tired, but steady, as if she drew strength from the earth itself. He stood there longer than he meant to, watching, before clearing his throat and walking away. These moments were not confessions, not declarations. They were fragments, small signs that beneath the coldness lay something waiting to grow. He would not have admitted it even to himself, but her quiet strength was no longer invisible to him. It unsettled him. How her silence could speak louder than words. how her patience could challenge his pride more than anger ever could. Clara, too, felt the shift, though she did not name it. She saw the way his gaze lingered a little longer, how his footsteps slowed when passing her. She noticed the way he sat nearer by the fire, though no words passed between them. It was not love, not yet, but it was no longer only duty. Something unspoken stirred, like roots pushing through hard ground. The stillness was not without ache. There were nights when she wished he would speak, when she longed for him to see her not as an obligation but as a partner. Yet she did not press him. Her strength lay in endurance, in letting time shape what force could not. And in that endurance she was slowly, silently carving a place in his guarded heart. This was the season of stillness, quiet meals, silent evenings, small acts of care unnoticed yet not unseen. A fragile peace rested between them, fragile but real, and though Elias would not admit it, the silence was beginning to change him. The storms had tested their walls, but the stillness was working on his heart in ways he did not yet understand. The quiet between them could not last forever. Stillness, though gentle, often gives way to tension, like a river that looks calm on the surface but carries a strong current beneath. That was where Elias and Clara now found themselves. It began with small misunderstandings. Elias, tired from the field, came in late one evening and found the lamp burning low. Clara had waited, setting food aside for him. He mistook her quiet act as judgment. "You don't need to wait," he said sharply, his voice heavier than the words. Clara only lowered her eyes and nodded, but the sting of that moment stayed with him. Another time he overheard neighbors whispering about her at the market. They said she was too proud, that she walked as if the world owed her something. Elias bristled at their words, though he did not defend her out loud. Instead, he carried their voices home, and his silence grew heavier around her. Clara, sensing the shift, did not ask, but she felt the weight of unspoken things pressing between them. Then came a true test. His younger brother, reckless and thoughtless, had fallen into debt. It was a matter that could stain the family's name, dragging Elias into a storm of shame. Clara learned of it quietly, not from Elias, but from whispers that drifted through town. She did not confront him. Instead, she acted in a way he did not expect. She sold something precious, an heirloom from her mother, a locket she had kept hidden in a small wooden box. With the money, she settled part of the debt before it grew worse. She did it quietly, without asking for thanks, without even telling him. Elias discovered it only by accident when he found the box empty. At first, anger rose in him. How could she take such a step without his word? Pride burned in his chest, heavy and sharp. But then when he looked at her, calm, steady, refusing to boast about her sacrifice, something inside him faltered. She had done it not for herself, not even for recognition, but for him, for his family's honor. He could not say it out loud. Pride sealed his tongue. Yet the image of her giving up something so dear stayed with him. He began to see her not only as the woman bound to him by duty, but as someone who carried weight for him without complaint. The tension between them rose higher. Each small act of hers, unnoticed before, now pressed against his pride. He found himself watching her more closely. When she rose before dawn to tend the fire, when she stayed late to finish work with weary hands, when she bore his silence without bitterness, each moment unsettled him more. And Clara, though outwardly calm, felt the strain too. She could carry silence, but she could not help the ache that came with it. She had given much more than he realized, and sometimes wondered if he would ever see her for who she truly was. The air in their home grew thick with things unsaid. Pride held Elias back. Composure held Clara steady. But under both ran a current of longing neither dared name. The storms of sharp words had passed. The stillness had softened edges. But now the quiet carried heat, a pressure building, waiting for something to break. This was the rising tension, the slow burn of sacrifice and misunderstanding, and though Elias did not yet know it, every act of hers was drawing him closer to a truth he had spent his whole life resisting. His heart was not stone, though he wished it to be. It was beginning to bend even if he could not yet see it. The days grew heavier, like clouds thick with rain that refused to break. Elias felt the weight of things he could not name pressing harder each time he looked at Clara. She moved through their home as always, quiet, steady, carrying burdens without complaint, but now he could not ignore her. The silence that once shielded him now unsettled him. One evening his mother came to visit. She looked around the house with sharp eyes and made small comments meant to sting. "A wife should soften a man's home," she said, running a finger along the mantel as if dust could prove her point. Clara only smiled faintly, neither defending herself nor shrinking back. Elias watched, feeling anger rise, not at Clara, but at the quiet judgment in his mother's tone. Yet pride kept him still. He did not speak in Clara's defense, though every part of him wanted to. Later, when the house was quiet again, the weight of his silence pressed harder than his mother's words. The tension grew sharper when illness came. A fever swept through the town, taking the strong and weak alike. Clara tended neighbors without hesitation, moving from bed to bed, offering water, cooling foreheads with steady hands. Elias watched her risk herself, her skin pale with exhaustion but her voice calm, carrying strength where others faltered. He wanted to stop her, to tell her she was giving too much, but each time he tried, the words caught in his throat. She was braver than he, and he knew it. One night she stumbled back into the house, her body trembling from weariness. She sank into a chair without a word, her hands trembling as she tried to remove her shoes. Elias stood frozen for a moment, torn between pride and something deeper. Then, almost without thinking, he knelt before her and loosened the laces with his own rough hands. She looked at him, startled. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, the silence between them was not distance but closeness. Fragile, unspoken, but real. He stood quickly, muttering something about rest as if to cover the crack in his pride. But inside, something had shifted. Clara never spoke of that moment. She did not need to. Her quiet sacrifices continued, unremarked but undeniable. She gave herself not with loud gestures but in steady, unseen ways that Elias could no longer ignore. Still, misunderstandings crept in. One afternoon he found her speaking with a neighbor, a man who lingered too long in conversation. Elias said nothing, but his chest burned with feelings he did not name. Later that night his words came out sharp, accusing without cause. Clara met his anger with silence. Not weakness, not fear, simply silence that said she would not defend herself against false charges. The weight of his mistake struck him only after the words had left his mouth, and shame gnawed at him. He began to see that he was not only fighting her. He was fighting himself, his pride, his fear, his unwillingness to yield. Clara had become more than a duty, more than a name tied to his. She was becoming his anchor, though he still resisted the truth. The tension was no longer just in their house. It lived inside him, pulling at every word he spoke, every silence he kept. Each sacrifice of hers, each patient act, each moment she stood strong where he faltered. These became stones pressing against his walls. And though the walls still stood, cracks were spreading. He was closer than he knew to breaking. This was the heart of their rising tension. Love unspoken, sacrifice unnoticed yet undeniable, pride standing in the way of surrender. Elias did not yet understand it, but the day was coming when silence and pride would no longer protect him. The days pressed on, and with them the weight of unspoken truths. Elias tried to keep his heart guarded, but Clara's quiet strength kept breaking through the cracks he thought were sealed. One evening, trouble came to the family's doorstep again. His younger brother, restless and reckless, had not learned from past mistakes. This time it was worse. He had become entangled in a fight that risked not only his own name but Elias's as well. Word spread quickly in the small town. Whispers turned into sharp judgments, and soon Elias felt the old burden pressing harder than ever. Clara saw his struggle, though he tried to hide it. He carried himself like stone, jaw tight, shoulders square, as if he could carry the shame by sheer force of will. But in the quiet of the night she rose without telling him, and went to speak with those who had been wronged. She gave what little she had saved and more. She offered her own word, her own dignity to smooth what his brother had broken. She returned late, weary but composed, and never spoke of what she had done. Elias only learned of it by accident when a neighbor praised Clara for her kindness. He felt both pride and shame at once. Pride that she had the strength to protect his family, and shame that it had been her sacrifice, not his, that held their honor steady. That night, as she set a simple meal on the table, he looked at her with new eyes, but the words still caught in his throat. "Thank you. I see you. I need you." He could not bring himself to say them. Instead, silence hung between them again, though its weight now felt unbearable. The tension inside him grew until it spilled out in small, sharp ways. He became restless, pacing the house at night, picking at faults that were not there, lashing out only to regret it the moment the words left his mouth. Clara bore it quietly, though not without cost. Her eyes carried shadows now, her steps slower, her strength stretched thin. Yet still she endured, giving without demand, steady as the earth beneath them. Then came the day that shifted everything. A storm swept through the land, fierce and wild, tearing branches from trees and sending fire racing across the dry fields. Elias was out working when the flames came close to the edge of their property. He ran back, breath burning in his chest, only to find Clara outside, helping neighbors drive their livestock to safety. Her hair whipped in the wind, her face pale from smoke, but her movements were steady. "Get inside," he shouted, fear sharper than anger. But she shook her head, refusing to leave others to face the danger alone. Elias felt something in him break then, not anger, not pride, but fear of losing her. The thought struck him harder than any flame could. For a moment the fire around them seemed less dangerous than the fire in his chest. When the storm finally passed, leaving smoke and ash in its wake, Elias found her sitting on the steps, exhausted but unbowed. He stood over her, words tangled in his throat. He wanted to scold her for risking herself, to demand why she had put her life in danger. But beneath the anger lay something else, something deeper. He could not name it yet, but it shook him to the core. The cracks in his pride were no longer small. They were widening, breaking apart the walls he had built his whole life. He did not know it yet, but he was nearing the moment when his heart could no longer stand upright in its stubbornness. The day of surrender was drawing close, though he still fought against it with all the strength he had left. The fire had passed, but its smoke lingered in the air and in Elias's chest. He could not forget the sight of Clara standing against the storm, risking herself for others without fear. It unsettled him more than any quarrel or silence ever had. Pride told him to let it go, to bury the feeling deep, but his heart would not obey. In the days that followed, Clara moved with the same quiet steadiness as always. But Elias saw her differently. Every gesture spoke louder now. When she carried water, he noticed the strain in her arms. When she bent over her sewing, he saw the weariness in her shoulders. He realized how much she gave without complaint, and how little he had offered in return. One evening he returned from the fields later than usual. The lamp in the kitchen glowed softly, and Clara sat waiting, though her eyes were heavy with sleep. A bowl of stew sat on the table, still warm. She looked up at him, no words, only that quiet dignity that had always unsettled him. Something in him ached. He wanted to tell her she did not need to wait for him, that she deserved rest. But instead he sat, ate in silence, and the words remained trapped inside. The tension between them was no longer as sharp as it had been in the storm days. It was heavy, pressing, like the air before another downpour. Clara felt it too. She longed for him to see her, not only as duty but as a partner. She had carried the weight of their silence for so long that her heart began to wonder how much more she could bear. Then came another test. A message arrived from a relative far away asking for help. The family's name was at stake again, and Elias knew it would cost them dearly to intervene. He sat at the table, the letter crumpled in his fist, pride wrestling with duty. Clara said nothing at first. She only watched him, steady as always. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but firm. "You don't have to carry this alone." The words pierced deeper than any argument. Elias looked at her, and for the first time, he saw not only her strength but her willingness to stand with him. His chest tightened. He wanted to accept her offer, but pride still clung like chains. He shook his head, muttering that it was his burden, not hers. Clara did not argue. She simply set her hands back to her work. But the silence after those words was not like before. It was fuller, heavier, like a truth waiting to be spoken. Elias could feel it pressing against him, demanding surrender. That night he could not sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the sound of Clara's steady breathing beside him. He thought of the locket she had given up, the fever she had fought, the fire she had braved, and now the words she had spoken. "You don't have to carry this alone." His pride told him to ignore it, to stay unmoved. But his heart, tired, aching, restless, knew she was right. He turned his head in the dark, watching the faint outline of her face in the lamplight. She looked peaceful in sleep, though he knew her strength had cost her much. For the first time, Elias admitted the truth to himself, though not aloud. He needed her. Not her silence, not her duty. Her. The rising tension inside him had reached its peak. The walls of pride were breaking, the storm inside him building toward the moment he could no longer resist. His heart was on the edge of kneeling, though he still fought against it in stubborn silence. The breaking point came not with thunder, but with silence, a silence different from before, heavier, final, like the closing of a door. Clara had endured much, but even the strongest heart can grow weary. After weeks of carrying burdens unseen and watching Elias fight against himself, she made a quiet choice. One morning, she packed a small bundle of clothes and placed it by the door. When Elias came in from the barn, sweat on his brow and dust on his boots, he found her standing there. Her face was calm, but her eyes were tired. "I cannot live in a house where I am only a name," she said softly. The words were not harsh, but they struck harder than any storm. "I have given all I can. If it is not enough, I will go." Elias froze. For a moment he could not speak, could not move. Pride rose in him, telling him to let her go, to prove that he needed no one. But fear thundered louder, fear of losing her, fear of watching her walk away and never return. "Go?" he managed, his voice rough, almost breaking. Clara nodded, her chin lifting with quiet strength. "I will not stay where I am, only endured." The words shattered something inside him. For years he had built walls of pride, carrying the weight of duty, hiding behind silence. But now those walls crumbled. He saw her as she truly was, patient, steadfast, strong. Stronger than he. She had given him more than he deserved, and still he had held himself back. Now he faced the truth. Without her, his life would be hollow. "Clara," his voice cracked on her name. He stepped forward, his hands shaking. For the first time in his life, Elias felt his pride bend. "Don't go." She looked at him, searching his face, waiting for words he had never spoken. He struggled, his chest tight, his heart fighting against the chains of stubbornness. But the fear of losing her broke through. His voice fell low, raw, unguarded. "I need you." The silence that followed was not cold. It was full, trembling with the weight of surrender. His head bowed, shoulders heavy, as if he could no longer stand under the burden of pride. For the first time his heart knelt, not in defeat but in love. Clara's eyes softened, though tears glimmered there. She did not move at once. She needed to see that his words were not passing, not born of fear alone. Elias sank to one knee before her, his rough hands reaching but not forcing, his head bowed. "I was blind," he whispered. "You gave everything and I gave nothing. Forgive me." The bundle of clothes still sat by the door, but Clara no longer reached for it. She looked at the man before her. Not proud, not distant, but broken open, surrendered. Slowly she set her hand in his. Her voice was quiet, but it carried warmth. "I never wanted perfection. Only the truth." At that moment Elias understood. Love was not a duty. It was not silent. It was not pride held high. It was surrender, not weakness but strength. The day had come and his heart had finally bowed. The storm of pride was over. But what remained was fragile, trembling, waiting to grow. Their marriage was no longer only a name. It was something new, something alive. And both of them knew the hardest part was not the storm, but learning how to live in peace after. The air in the house felt different after that day. The silence was no longer heavy with distance. It was gentle now, like the quiet of dawn before the sun breaks over the land. Elias had spoken the words he had buried for too long, and in doing so, something between them had shifted. Still, change did not happen all at once. A lifetime of pride does not vanish in a single moment. Elias found himself stumbling often, uncertain how to speak when words had never been his strength. But Clara, steady as ever, did not demand perfection. She only asked for the truth. One evening, as they sat by the fire, he reached for her hand. His grip was rough, awkward, almost clumsy, but she did not pull away. Instead, her fingers rested in his, and for a long moment they sat without words, letting the warmth of that touch speak what neither knew how to say. For Elias, it was harder than any battle, opening his heart in small, simple gestures. But he had bowed once. Now he could learn to bow again, not in defeat, but in love. Clara began to see the change in him. He lingered by her side more often, his eyes softer, his silence less sharp. Once, when she grew weary after a long day, he took her work from her hands and finished it himself. She said nothing, only watching as his strong, calloused hands fumbled at first and then steadied. In that act she saw not duty but care, real, living care. The town too noticed. Neighbors who had whispered of coldness now spoke of how Elias stayed close to his wife, how his eyes followed her with a quiet reverence. His mother, sharp as ever, looked on with surprise when she saw him defend Clara against a careless remark. The man who once held pride higher than all else was now willing to lay it down for her. Yet the deepest change was not in what others saw. It was in Elias himself. For years he had carried the burden of keeping his family's honor, of standing tall and unbending. But Clara had shown him that strength was not in hardness. It was in surrender, in letting someone stand beside you. Each day he let himself lean on her. The weight on his shoulders grew lighter. Clara, too, found her heart softening in new ways. She had endured silence and storms, had given without asking, had stood alone in the shadows of his pride. Now at last she was no longer alone. She had not asked for grand gestures, and Elias did not offer them. What he gave was better: honesty, care, and the courage to kneel in spirit even while standing tall before the world. One night, as the fire burned low and the world outside lay quiet, Elias spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "I don't deserve you." Clara turned to him, her gaze steady, her lips softening into a faint smile. "Deserve has nothing to do with love." Her words settled into him like rain into dry earth. He bowed his head, letting the truth of them sink deep. For the first time he believed it. Not only that she loved him, but that love was not something earned by pride or duty. It was something given freely, quietly, like the way she had given herself all along. The storms had passed. The stillness had done its work. The rising tension had broken at last. Now they stood at the edge of something new, not perfect, not without struggle, but real. Their marriage was no longer a name on paper, but a bond forged in fire, silence, and surrender. The land was quiet again. The storms had passed, the fires gone, leaving only ash and the slow return of green. In that stillness, Clara and Elias found a new way of living, no longer bound by duty alone, but by choice. Mornings began differently. Elias no longer rushed past her with silence pressed on his lips. Instead, he paused, even if only for a moment, to meet her eyes. A nod, a faint smile, sometimes a word or two. It was enough to say what once he never dared. And Clara, steady as always, answered with her quiet warmth, not needing grand speeches to feel the truth of what had changed. Work on the land continued, as it always had. But Elias felt it lighter now. He no longer carried the fields, the house, the family name on his shoulders alone. He carried them with her. When his hands grew weary, hers steadied him. When her strength faltered, he lent his. Two lives that had once walked apart now moved in rhythm, step by step, neither leading, neither left behind. The small town, sharp-eyed as ever, noticed. People spoke of how Clara's gaze softened when Elias entered a room, how Elias's voice grew gentler when speaking of her. The same neighbors who once whispered of coldness now told stories of quiet devotion. They said the house on the ridge had changed, that its walls no longer echoed with emptiness but carried the warmth of a true home. But the real change could not be measured by others' words. It lived in the small, simple moments. When Clara placed bread on the table, Elias reached to slice it for her. When he came in from the fields, she set water ready for his hands. When silence fell between them, it was no longer sharp or heavy, but calm and filled with unspoken understanding. One evening they walked together to the ridge where the grave of Elias's father lay. The sky stretched wide above them, painted with the colors of dusk. Elias stood with his hands clasped, the weight of years heavy in his chest. Beside him, Clara's hand slipped into his. He did not flinch, did not hesitate. He closed his rough fingers over hers, bowing his head. For a long time they stood there, the wind moving through the grass, saying nothing. No words were needed. It was in moments like these that Elias understood how far he had come. Once he had thought love was a weakness, that kneeling meant defeat, but Clara had shown him another truth. Love was not chains. Love was freedom. The freedom to set down pride, to let another carry the weight with you, to kneel not in loss but in devotion. Clara, too, felt the change. She no longer walked through the house as a shadow. She walked as a partner, her presence welcomed, her voice heard. The long ache of silence had healed into something steady and whole. She had not sought to break him, only to stand beside him, and now at last he allowed her to. Their marriage had begun in name only, born of duty, shaped by storms, quieted by stillness, tested by fire. But it did not end there. It became something stronger, two hearts that had learned to kneel, not in fear but in love. And so in the quiet after all storms, Elias and Clara found their truth. Not perfection, not ease, but something greater. A union chosen freely, built on surrender and strength, steady as the land itself, enduring as the horizon line where the sky meets the earth. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more tales of love, redemption, and hope. Share it with someone who believes in second chances, and join us again for the next journey.